If there's a platform where you can find literally anything you were looking for, it is Reddit. You will find anything from scary stories to X-rated content posted all over. However, some of the things written here can be very creepy. Today, we look at 5 true horror stories from Reddit. Switch off the lights and enjoy the show. There was no girl. I had gone camping with my husband and his family, and we were at a small remote lake in New Mexico. We were a group of about 10 people, while another group of 6 people was in the next campsite. We were all busy doing our activities such as making s'mores, having a few drinks, and telling stories. However, everything was halted when we all heard what sounded like a little girl crying out for help. None of us had any children with us, and neither did the other group. However, we were all sure that we heard a little girl screaming. We therefore decided to search the area where we heard the noises coming from. In the field behind our campsites, we saw a very tall, pure white figure standing about 100 feet away from us in the field. It was the one making the noises. We all concluded that it was about 6 feet tall, skinny, and white as ever. As we moved closer to investigate, we saw the white figure moving away. It eventually disappeared into the trees and we never saw it again. However, we would still hear the little girl calling for help as we all tried to sleep. Ghost Rest Stop. My mom, my sister, and I were driving across the country. I was 16 and my sister was 20. Even though it was late, we were well rested and alert. As we were driving along the interstate, it got to a point where we needed gas and a bathroom break. Therefore, we pulled over when we saw the only rest stop in 200 miles. There was a van full of teenagers on a road trip at the gas station, and a small gray car that was parked at the pump in front of us. Outside this car were 2 young men who were standing still as ever. Something was off about this place. We had been on the road for days, but we had never been afraid until we came to this one. My mother and sister went to the bathroom, and I stayed in the car. The teenagers were creeped out because they couldn't get the pump to work, so they drove off in a hurry. I was closely watching the car in front of us, and the 2 men never moved even an inch. My sister and mom came running back, and when they got in, the 2 men turned their heads and looked at us. What we saw was so horrifying that we left here like we were in pursuit. Their eyes were nothing but voids, not black and not reflecting any light, but a complete void. We sped off and never stopped until we got to the next city. When we searched for that rest stop on Google Maps and even on paper maps, it didn't exist. Even the locals didn't know of any rest stops there. We have even driven on that interstate, and there is no rest stop. Graveyard Ghost. We were in my friend's beat-up Subaru as we drove through a massive graveyard. We eventually stopped and walked down a hill until we came across a little pond. On the other side of the pond, someone was sitting there. We couldn't make out any features because the figure was all black. The only thing we could notice was that it looked like a man in an old-style top hat. We innocently waved hello to the figure, but it never moved. After a while, the figure suddenly jumped to its feet and started running towards us on the water. However, it vanished in thin water when it was about halfway through the pond. My friend and I, on seeing this, screamed as we ran to the car. The car would not start as we struggled to get it to start. We heard some banging on the back of the car. It was not a constant banging, but it took place at intervals of a few seconds. However, if you looked outside, there was nobody or nothing there. None of our phones had any service, so we couldn't call for any help. Even though the banging had stopped, the next 30 minutes were terrifying, not knowing what else would come at us. The car finally started and my friend floored it. We sped out of the graveyard so fast. The moment we got out of the gate, our phone regained service. We don't know what was out there, but it was definitely not human, and it was not an animal. An old friend. When I was 37 years old, there was an old high school reunion. Excited, I flew into the nearest airport and rented a car. It was about 35 miles through a rural, almost abandoned part of the country. I noticed someone on the side of the road flagging me down about 3 miles outside of town. When I got closer, I realized it was one of the guys I'd gone to school with. For the sake of the story, let's call him Jim. So Jim gets in the car and we start talking. It had been 20 years since I last saw him, but he looked the same. Just a bit older though. When we got to town, I asked him if he wanted to come to the VFW and have a drink. However, he declines, telling me to take him home. I knew Jim's parents lived a few blocks from my grandmother's house, but when I turned in that direction, he told me to take him to the outskirts of town. There was a mobile home park, and I assumed that was where he lived. When we got to the end of the turnoff, he said, "Just drop me here. It was good to see you again." And with that, he just walks off into the night. I then headed over to the VFW to meet a few old classmates, and we got to talking. As we were talking about who was coming to the reunion, I mentioned that I had picked up Jim about 3 miles east of town and dropped him off. Everyone, including the guys in karaoke, gets quiet. Even my cousin goes white as snow. In a soft voice, I was told, "Barb, Jim died on that curve 8 years ago. Rolled his car, we were all at his funeral." The moment I heard this, I immediately got dizzy and I went outside to take some deep breaths. There on the seat, I found a local newspaper printed 8 years ago with Jim's obituary. To this day, I still have that paper. Death came for him. I was standing next to my very sick dad in my parents' room. My dad was diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal cancer, and there was no way he would make it. We all knew that. However, as I was standing there, I felt as though something was behind me. I immediately looked towards the doorway to the living room, and there, peeking around the corner, was something about 4'6". It was also fully black. When I ran towards it, it immediately slipped around the door. However, when I got out of the doorway, there was nothing there. When I stepped back inside the room and told my dad about it, he was completely confused. During my dad's final days, some people in the house admitted to seeing the same thing. My mom said that she saw the same thing on multiple occasions in multiple places around the house. However, ever since Dad passed away, we have never seen it again.